Hi, I'm Jeremy, the Zoo Nerd, coming to you live from my backyard in beautiful Los Angeles, California. I hope you're happy. I hope you're healthy. I hope you're staying safe. Today, for our critter chat, we're going to talk about one of the smallest kinds of animals, but also one of the most important for humans. Today is World Bee Day, and we're going to be talking about bees. Now, scientists have identified over 25,000 different species of bees around the world, with over 4,000 of those being just here in North America. So I'm not going to try to name any specific bee species, but I am going to try to show you some bees today. So I'm standing amongst my pomegranate trees, which are in bloom right now, and have a wide variety of bees buzzing about them. So to start off with, bees are found there's one right here. You see it? Bees are found globally. They're on all the continents except Antarctica. They're also on many of the islands throughout the world, with the exception of islands that don't have much plant life. Bees evolved millions of years ago, around the same time that flowering plants evolved. And so bees are an animal. I know some people sometimes struggle with thinking that insects are not animals, but they truly are. Bees are insects. They belong to the phylum, so it goes kingdom, that's animal. Phylum, that's arthropods for bees. So that also includes things like the arachnids and also the crustaceans. So arachnids are spiders, crustaceans are things like crabs. So those are kind of all in the same big group called the phylum of arthropods. That means that they have kind of multi-segmented legs is what arthropod means. And then they are part of the class of insects. Now, as far as insects go, I believe, get it? That insects account for more animals than any other class of animals across all animal species. There are more insects than anything else. And bees are some of the most important insects to us. And that is because of how they live and what they do. First of all, bees are vegetarians. So they're not ever trying to eat you. They're never trying to eat another animal, not even another insect. They're trying to eat what's inside here. What's in these flowers is nectar. And nectar is the juice that plants make inside their flowers that attracts animals like bees called pollinators. So bees are the most important of all pollinators, but there's a lot of different kinds of pollinators. Other things that are pollinators include things like butterflies or hummingbirds. There's even some kinds of mammals and birds that are pollinators as well. But bees pollinate more things than all the others, so they are called the super pollinator. Bees will also eat the pollen. So in the flowers, you can often see yellow, sometimes it's white, sometimes it's orange, but it's kind of a dusty, powdery color. That is the pollen in the flower. And the flower needs the pollen to be transported to other flowers of its same species to help to grow the plants or to produce new seeds or fruits. And bees are experts at doing that. So the bees will eat the nectar, the sweet juice, and the pollen, that kind of dusty, powdery part of the flower. And that's what bees are doing. They're looking for the pollen, they're looking for the nectar. So female bees in particular are the ones who are the workers, who are out gathering the pollen and the nectar for themselves or for their hive. And they actually have very special adaptation. Bees have 6 legs total, so they're kind of in sets, so 3 sets of legs, and their back set of legs has extra long little hairs on it. And those hairs kind of come together to form what scientists have called a pollen basket. And if you've ever seen a bee that's been collecting pollen, you can often see that basket of pollen. You can see a bunch of the bright yellow powdery stuff from the flowers on the bee. And so it gathers that pollen as it crawls in around the flower and drinks the nectar. It has a specialized tongue that it uses to get the nectar out of the flower. and it puts it into a special place in its throat called a crop. Now, if that sounds familiar at all, that's because birds also have a crop, and they also store food in their crop to take back to the nest to feed to their babies. Bees will store nectar in their crop to take back to their hive to feed their babies, although they're not necessarily the parents of the babies at the hive. They're more like the older siblings doing a lot to help out, or the aunts and uncles. The ants, I'm sorry, they're not uncles. Male bees have one purpose, and that's to reproduce. That's all they do. They don't help with anything else. They're very lazy and only concerned about reproducing. So when the female bees with the crop full of nectar get back to the hive, they start to produce honey, and they turn that into honey. We're very familiar with that. Many people eat honey, and bees have actually been domesticated as something called the honeybee. And those are descended from the European honeybee, and they are now found on all the continents of the world because people take honeybees around to help pollinate fruit trees and vegetables. And honeybees live in great big colonies and provide humans with a lot of very useful things. So in addition to the honey that they obviously make, they also make two other things that are very helpful for us. One is called beeswax. And so what the wax is, they have a special gland on their body that helps process the nectar and the pollen that they eat into a waxy substance. And with that, they make honeycomb. Honeycomb is the six-sided shape that inside the beehive, that's where they store the honey, and that's where they lay eggs, or where the queen lays the eggs, and the babies grow into their larval stage. And then once they metamorphosize, they are ready to come out and be bees themselves. And so the beeswax, people use that to make candles and cosmetics, but it's also used in food. So we use beeswax sometimes as a candy coating, like in jelly beans. The outside of a jelly bean is traditionally made from beeswax. So it's safe for us to eat. It's low calorie, but it provides a nice texture to hold things together like the sugary middle part of a jelly bean. Now, bees also do a lot of pollination, which I've already mentioned, but that is a huge, huge thing. They estimate that it's worth billions and billions of dollars to the agricultural community, in that bees do most of the work in helping reproduce the fruits and flowers for many different plants. Oh, hey, we may have another big bee coming in. I just saw a carpenter bee. They're one of the biggest bees in North America, and he's right over here. So if I see him again, I'm gonna switch the camera around and see if we can film him while we talk. But bees that pollinate up to 75% of all fruits, nuts, and veggies in the United States. That's huge. They also pollinate 80% of all flowering plants across the world. Now, there are some other things, like I mentioned earlier, that do some pollination. Hummingbirds are something I see with some of my flowers here in my backyard. And butterflies are also a very common pollinator I see around my yard. Now, we're usually very familiar with the social organization of the social bees. So a beehive setting with a queen. She's the one that lays eggs. She's the only one that lays eggs. She kind of sits in the hive, lays eggs every day. Different male bees called drones come to mate with her so that they can have babies together. And then all the other bees in the beehive are females. They're sisters to the queen bee, or eventually her offspring once she's producing enough babies. And they feed the queen, they feed the babies, they build the honeycomb, they gather food for the hive. They do most of the work. A queen bee can live between 2 and 5 years, depending on the species. The other bees at the hive, they don't even live a full year. So drones, once they hatch, they grow pretty big. They're the males. They live only to reproduce. So once they're big enough to fly away, they'll fly away and fly to a different hive to breed with another female, another queen bee, and then they die. That's all they do. So their lifespan is very short, usually only a couple of weeks or months, depending on the species. The worker bees, they do all the work. So for her first 3 days after a worker bee hatches, her job is to clean the hive. So she cleans out the area she hatched in, the honeycomb area. She removes any waste around the hive. That's her job for the first 3 days. Then she gets a promotion to another job. And for the next few days, she's the nurse who feeds the larva and the queen bee in the hive. So she goes around and feeds them so they don't have to move. And the larvae are in the little honeycomb apartments, and she takes care of those. So after about 10 days, she gets promoted again and becomes a builder bee. And that's when her wax glands develop to where she can now process the nectar and the pollen and make wax, to make the beeswax, to make the honeycomb. So then she starts building more little six-sided shaped honeycomb apartments for more larvae and for places where they store the honey. And she'll do that from day 10 to day 16. Then at about day 16, she gets a promotion again to be the receiver of the pollen and nectar. So she greets the bees coming into the hive and she takes from them the pollen and the nectar and puts that in the right storage places that they need. Then after that, her next job is to be a guard for the hive. And so she'll start to venture out of the hive for the first time in her life. She helps protect the hive from any animals or threats that may come and helps communicate that with other bees in the hive. And then after a few days, she gets her last promotion. And her last promotion is to be a food collector for the hive. And that's when she goes out and really explores the world and does the things that we see bees doing, which is pollinating flowers and gathering pollen and nectar for the other bees in the hive. And depending on the species, that last duty can last a couple of days up to a couple of months. So most worker bees only live about 6 months at most. So they have a very important task, but they don't do it for very long. So a lot of people are very familiar with that aspect of bees, the beehive situation. But most bee species actually don't live that way. Most bees live solitary, so they live alone. And a female will find a male of her species out there and will breed with him, and then she will go and lay a few eggs in a very remote location, usually on a leaf or in the hollow of a tree or somewhere around where she feels her eggs will be safe. She'll gather up some honey and some pollen and some nectar, and she'll make something that scientists call bee bread. She'll mix the two together and she'll leave it for her eggs. For when they hatch, they have something to eat right away as they're larvae and develop into full-size bees. That's the way a lot of bees live. Honeybees, bumblebees, and a few other species of bees live in the more social hive thing, but most bees live kind of alone. Now, a lot of people are afraid of bees because of their stinger. And I have been stung by a bee twice, and it hurt both times. Once was in my hand, once was in the back of my head. The first time was about 15 years ago, and the second time was about 3 years ago. So it doesn't feel good, it does hurt, but is that any reason for me to kill a bee? No. I very much respect bees and the good work that they do. Here's a little bee right here. But for bees, their stinger can only be used once. So if they're going to sting you, it's because they feel that their entire community is very, very threatened. Usually it's a honeybee that is doing the stinging. And that's because it's trying to protect its hive, and you're either too close to its hive or it itself feels very attacked. One of the worst things we can do when we see bees is swat away at them. They think that you're trying to kill them if you do that, and then they're gonna try to sting you more. So if you see a bee, the best thing to do is hold still. Don't move around, don't move real fast, don't move towards it. That can scare it more and cause it to sting you. Now, there's also been a lot of talk about some different types of bees or some of their cousins that can cause some trouble as well. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about those and kind of be a little myth busters about some of the other things, starting with killer bees. So killer bees is something that I heard when I was a little kid. I heard that the killer bees were coming and I was terrified. And many of my friends were terrified that these bees were gonna come and they were gonna kill us all, and then we'd all be dead and there'd be no more people because these big crazy bees called killer bees were coming. Well, what killer bees actually are, so I talked a little bit about how people domesticated honeybees in Europe, and then we moved honeybees all over the world to all the different countries to help make honey for people and to help further grow fruit and other vegetables and crops that people need bees to have happen. So people in Brazil were trying to get bigger, better bees that could withstand the extreme climate conditions and some of the native local species that were kind of not doing so well with the honeybees. They were trying to make bigger, better honeybees that could do more. So they crossbred them with some bees from Africa, and it didn't go well. And those are now called Africanized honeybees. And so those honeybees are particularly aggressive. They will do more to defend their hive. They can still only sting once. That's true with all bees. But if you get too close to their hive, they will come after you and they will follow you. And people have died from being stung by Africanized honeybees. The number of deaths worldwide is significantly low. Usually the bees are chasing people and the people panic and people get into a situation where other things cause them trouble, like if they're out hiking and they fall, or they go off a trail, or they run into a busy road because they're getting chased by the bees and then they get hit by a car, many things like that. Now I have a friend and her mom got stung by African honeybees. She was in Phoenix in Arizona. She was hiking. She was up on a mountain in the middle of the desert. She actually was hiking along and came right across their hive, and they got mad and they started to chase her. She was running down the trail. She slipped, she fell, she hurt her leg. She had to be helped out. She had to go to the emergency room. She had bees stuck into her all over because once they sting, it kills them. But she had several stuck in her head. She had been stung over 100 times, but my friend's mom did not die. She was in some pain, it hurt. She was in pain because she fell and hurt her leg, but they did not kill her. Killer bees is a big bad press representation of the Africanized honeybees. They can hurt you. They're very, very rare, although they're becoming a little more common in parts of the United States, particularly Arizona and Texas. Other places, not so much. If you're in most of the United States, you don't have to worry about killer bees or Africanized honeybees. They like warm places. Now, recently, there's been some talk about another kind of insect that has caused a lot of problems, and people have reacted, have caused a lot of problems, and they've been called murder hornets. Now, you may have heard of these, you may have not. I'll give you a brief rundown. So a murder hornet comes from Asia. It's a big bug. They're 2 inches long, so they're like the size of your little finger. So they are a very big bug. They come from Asia. Last summer, they killed a hive of murder hornets that had set up in Vancouver Island in British Columbia in Canada. One hive. They found one hive. Then they saw 2 individual murder hornets across the border in the United States in a little town called Blaine, Washington. One of those murder hornets was killed. The other one flew off into the forest. They didn't find it again. Murder hornets cannot reproduce until fall, so there's no chance that there are hundreds of them out there or anything. The only people that need to be concerned about murder hornets right now are people in the very corner, northwest corner of Washington State. The rest of us don't need to worry. They're bugs. They cannot travel very far very quickly. Also, murder hornets do not murder people. Will they sting you? Can it hurt? Yes. They will not kill you. What murder hornets do is they kill bees. And that can be a problem because we need bees to get the food that we need, that bees provide for us. But when the story broke earlier in this year about murder hornets up in Washington state, there were some people who way overreacted and have started killing and setting traps for local insects like bees, thinking that they were going to catch and kill murder hornets. Murder hornets are not anywhere else in the United States except potentially a little corner of Northwest Washington. People in Tennessee and Kentucky have gone crazy trying to catch and kill murder hornets. And what they've been doing is catching and killing their localized bees. And they need those bees to grow their crops. So please don't overreact about murder hornets. They are not a threat to you unless you're in that little corner of Washington, and then the threat is very, very mild. So with that, I also wanted to talk a little bit about the difference between a bee and a hornet, and also a wasp. Those animals can get pretty confusing, but there's an easy way to tell them apart. They share a common ancestor, so they look kind of similar. Most of them have some yellow, maybe some black. Not all of them do. Some bees can actually be blue or red or green. Some hornets can be totally black, so they can take on some variety of looks. But here's some big generalizations that you can kind of rely on. First, bees are vegetarian. So if a little bug is on a plant, particularly a flower, 99% of the time it's going to be a bee. If it's not a bee, it's a wasp or a hornet, and it's going after another bug in the flower, because wasps and hornets are carnivores who eat other bugs. So, yeah, see this guy? That's a bee. We don't need to worry. Bees are doing some great work. For right now, he's gonna try to make me some more, she is going to make me some more pomegranates, and I'm very happy about that. So I'm gonna be very nice to this bee and let her go about her work. So another easy way to tell them apart, aside from what they eat and where they may be seen, bees are fuzzy or hairy. They have little hairs on them. So if you see a little bug that's yellow and black and it's fuzzy or has little hairs, it's a bee. If it's very sleek, it's not a bee. A very sleek body is going to be a wasp or a hornet. And the other big way you can tell them apart is their stingers. So a bee can sting once. When it does, its stinger comes out. And what is a stinger on a bee anyway? It's part that only the female bees have. It's called an ovipositor. So it's the way that she lays her eggs. And so the queen uses it to lay eggs. The other female bees have it, and they can use it as defense to sting. But they can sting once, and then it kills them, and it comes out of them. Wasps and hornets also have a stinger. Theirs does not detach. Only the females have the stinger, but they will use it to defend themselves. So if it's the same bug and it stings you more than once, it's a wasp or a hornet. So what's the difference between those? Hornets are gonna hurt more if they sting. Hornets are actually a type of wasp. There's hundreds of thousands of different species of wasps and hornets. So they're carnivores, they're sleek-bodied, their stingers don't detach. Hornets will be a little more painful, but unless you're allergic to a bee or a wasp, it's not going to kill you. If you are allergic, you could go into anaphylactic shock, which is an allergy-related shock, and that can cause death if you don't get treated. You don't find out, unfortunately, until you know. There may be a test for allergies. I'm not allergic to bees. I know because I didn't die when I got stung. So, yeah. Wasps also build a different kind of nest. And this is good for if you have a house and if you see a bunch of bees or wasps and you're not sure what it is. Bees will always have the honeycomb, the structure, the waxy part. Even if it's a bee by itself, a solitary bee, it will have that. It will just be smaller and it will be made from wax. It will be very waxy. Wasp will build similar shapes, but it's gonna look like paper or mud. They use either mud or wood that they chew up to make into paper to make a similar structure. Paper wasp nests are very common. Mud wasp nests are common in areas where there's a lot of very muddy soil or sandy soil. You'll sometimes see mud wasp nests. Now, I've been chased by wasps. It is not fun. So please don't ever try to threaten them. If you have wasps and you want to get rid of them, either call a professional or do so very safely. If you can remove them during the night when it's colder, that's a better option. So why is it Bee Day today? Why is there a World Bee Day? Why is that important? Well, I've talked about already how they're important to our crops, to our food. They produce, they pollinate 75% of all fruits, nuts, and vegetables in the United States. So that's huge. That's a big portion of the food that we eat. And bees, unfortunately, are threatened. Some bees have now been listed on the endangered species, and people have caused all of the problems that bees have. Surprise, surprise, people are messing things up again. So one of the biggest things that is threatening bees is habitat loss. If we come in and build a big city and put in a lot of parking lots and roads and buildings, there's no place for the bees to live. There's no plants, there's no flowers where they can get their food. This is the only way a bee gets food, is from flowers. Now, flowers don't always look this pretty. They're not always bright colors. So sometimes they can get them from flowers that may not look like flowers, like grass or other little plants that the flowers aren't so obvious. But habitat loss is a huge problem for bees, but it's not the only problem. Another one, and I had never really thought of this before being a problem for bees, is pollution. Air pollution causes lots of issues. There's all sorts of other junk in the air, right? Chemicals, bad gases, dirt, other things that are caught up in the air. That confuses the bees with their ability to sense where the flowers are. So they have to work harder, they get more tired, and sometimes they get worn out and can't make it back to the hive. So pollution's actually a huge problem for a lot of bees, and especially in some cities that have really bad air quality, they've noticed a decrease in the amount of bees and the decrease in the amount of crops that they can grow. So that's been a big problem. Now, another huge problem for bees, and this is probably the biggest lately, is pesticides. A pesticide is a poison specifically used to kill an animal of some sort. So pesticides can be out there for bugs. Pesticides can be out there for things like rats or mice or other animals that you may not want around. Oh, here's a little bee right here. But pesticides are very harmful to bees. And as far as I'm aware, all the poisons that they use to control any kind of bugs will kill all kinds of bugs. So there's not a poison that you can use necessarily to get rid of like ants or roaches or something, not a chemical poison at least, that will be safe for bees. Now, there are some organic things you can do that are safe for bees and will help get rid of some of those. So check the internet for ways to get rid of, if you have an ant problem in your house, usually the ants are there to look for water first off, but you can use different things to get rid of ants. Cornstarch is one of them. There's also something called diatomaceous earth that you can use to get rid of ants. Just cleaning up like leaves that are on the ground can help control a lot of other kinds of bugs that you may have around. Also, an easy way you can help in the fight against pesticides is when you're buying fruits and vegetables, try to buy things that are organic. Organic, officially certified organic produce has to come from a farm or a place where the food is grown that has not used pesticides for 7 years. That's the rule for being organic. It can't use any pesticides. That's a healthier way for our entire planet, as we know that bees have had a bad time and some other bugs that are very important have also had a very hard time because of pesticides. So there are often, I think they said it's over 1 million pounds of pesticides are used in the United States every year. That's a frightening number of amount of chemicals being dumped out over land. And although we know it's hurting the bees and some other animals, it could also be hurting us. And I don't really want to find out what pesticides can be doing to me and how they might be hurting me and the people I care about. So please try to choose organic food when you can to help limit the use of pesticides. And if you are not using or buying organic produce, try to make sure you wash it really well to make sure you don't have any poison on it as you're eating it. It could build up in your system and cause you problems in the long term. So the final threat that is causing some big problems for bees is climate change. And you think, well, how does climate change impact something like bees? Well, warmer, drier weather conditions can cause big problems for all sorts of animals. With the temperatures rising around the earth, it can throw off the weather, causes a lot of things like fires and droughts, like we saw in Australia earlier this year, like we saw in California last year. That can cause huge problems for bees. If you think bees have a hard time with pollution, think about how they do when the air is full of smoke and it burns down all the vegetation and they don't have anything to eat. So all of those are kind of related to climate change. But there's all sorts of problems that humans have caused, but there are a lot of people who are doing some really good work. And our special shout out is to an organization called the Honeybee Conservancy. So they've done a lot of really great work to educate people about the importance of bees, and they also have helped fundraise for a lot of places to help create like community gardens and help cities create places that can enrich a bee's life. And there's also a lot of really good tips on their website of how you can help bees in your yard, or if you live in an apartment, things you can do at your apartment even to help bees out. So I'll be posting a link up later today on how you can help bees. So with my experience with bees, I am not a beekeeper. I don't intend to be a beekeeper. I don't know that I am that interested in pursuing anything like that, but I have always appreciated beautiful flowers, and I love to eat fresh produce that I can grow in my yard. And so having bees around has always been something very important to me. In my yard right now, I have pomegranates that we can see flowering right here by me. I love to eat the pomegranates that my trees can grow, but I also grow loquats, tomatoes, peppers, and oranges, and hopefully lemons if my lemon tree ever gets going, and my peaches if the squirrels will learn to leave them alone. And so I always try to encourage a very healthy and organic setting in my own yard and try not to use things like pesticides that can cause big problems for bees and other critters. So I hope you've enjoyed what I've shared with you today, and I hope that you've learned a little something about ways that we can all help out our friends, the bees, because they do an awful lot for us. And yeah, that concludes our critter chat today. Oh, I was supposed to give a special shout out to the ultimate queen bee, Beyonce. She is the queen for many of us around the world. And although she does a lot for us, I don't see her out here pollinating flowers. So there's that. But until tomorrow, be happy, be healthy, have fun. See you later.